the oh yeah, good thing you're recording. The emerald ash borer, tomato hornworms that eat our tomatoes, aphids are just everywhere. Insects are bad for humans because we don't like ticks and mosquitoes, and we have to get rid of insects by using pesticides. So I think I hope by the end of this you will be convinced that none of those are true. We're going to talk about the beneficial insects. So there are a wide range of insects that we do want in our garden, because as you can see, at least down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's one that's taking care of one of the bad guy aphid type insects. So we can hopefully have these helpers to take care of the insects that we don't want, the pests. And I think one of the most famous, and the one that I think most people are most comfortable around, are the ladybugs or the lady beetles. And both the larvae and adults are good for taking care of a variety of invasive or pests. They only live about a year. The females can lay hundreds of eggs, and there's a wide variety. You can see on the previous slide, there are different types of lady beetles, and the nymphs or the young lady beetles really look quite different. They look kind of like these dragons. This on the left-hand side is the nymph. And so if you see those, don't squash them. Those are future ladybugs. And they, as young nymphs, will actually also eat aphids. You see this one attacking an aphid dinner there. They'll eat mealybugs, mites, some of the soft scales, as well as eggs of other insects. So they're really helpful, and they don't scare little kids generally. The next kind of helpful beetle or bug is a soldier beetle. And these are mostly gray, sometimes dark brown or yellow, and they might have different color body parts. And their larvae and their adults are both, again, helpful in the garden. So most of the larvae will eat insects in the soil where they live, and then the adults can fly up and feed on aphids, on caterpillars, and other insects that have soft bodies. You might look at this and think, hey, that kind of looks like at least the one on the left looks like a lightning bug. And they are not, lightning bugs are not in this specific group of beetles, but lightning bugs are also beneficials. So they are good for your yard as well. Lacewing insects are another really pretty, in a way, kind of insect. You'll see in this lower left-hand corner, it's a real shiny, you can see where it gets its name, lacewing. And the the nymphs and the adults are going to be, again, beneficial because they will take care of aphids, mealybugs, scale, eggs from other insects, mites, and soft-bodied insects. They only live a short time, about 6 weeks, but the females can lay up to 200 eggs. Now, if you see some of your plants up here in the right-hand corner, decorated with these little pearls, almost little pearls hanging off, you don't want to pick those off. Those are lacewing eggs. And so you want to make sure you let those survive so they can grow up and take care of your other insect pests. Sometimes you might think, oh no, what's on my plant? But I think a lot of times people just completely overlook those eggs. So especially if you see them in a row, you might see a few of them occasionally separate or individual, but often you'll see them in groups like that. The next group are the hoverflies or syrphid flies. They are not long-lived. They live less than a year, And they're kind of worrisome for a lot of people because they see them and they think this little guy down here on the left, he looks like a wasp or a hornet, I guess is what I mean. And he's not. He's actually a good guy. He will, as an adult, feed on pollen, but the larva will feed on those soft-bodied insects. So all of these things so far have been good for aphids, which you're probably familiar with on your plants from many years. One of the things to be sure about when you see these guys, and when you wonder whether it's a hoverfly, a good guy, or beneficial, or a hornet or wasp that you're worried about, is they will have a narrower constriction between their thorax and abdomen. So the ones that you might want to back away from faster. You don't want to necessarily get rid of them either, but just the scarier ones, if you will, have that constriction at their center. And then another kind of fly called the tachydnid fly, it's a parasitoid. It will actually parasitize caterpillars, sawflies, squash bugs, stink bugs, and grasshoppers. And they are pretty small little guys, gray, brown, or black, and with lighter or sometimes very colorful markings. So you can see this guy is a little orange abdomen there, and this one has some bright orange on his abdomen. I don't know, his, hers, either way. They lay eggs on the host insect. So here we see it on a squash bug. I think that's a squash bug. It could be a stink bug. I didn't key it down, but you can see that they lay their eggs, and then their offspring will actually burrow in and use that insect as the nutrition for the young nymphs of the tachydnid fly. Here we go. Oh, so there they are. Other kind of wasps, tiny wasps, will parasitize other insects, and these we consider beneficial parasites because they're killing the insect pests. So here you can see an aphid being parasitized. This is the parasitic wasp laying an egg in there. Here's another wasp laying an egg, laying its eggs in the egg of another organism, and caterpillar being parasitized. So these are great for getting rid of, let's see if I can move this. Excuse me, cabbage worms or tomato hornworms, some of those larger insects. Someone mentioned earlier about the borers. They can also be parasitized by these wasps. So that would be a good insect to encourage in your yard to help get rid of some of these other problem pest insects. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice. I haven't been talking a lot in the last few days. So how do you know when you have some of these good parasite insects in your yard? You can see evidence that they've been doing their job because you can see the parasitized insect. So here in the upper right is an aphid that doesn't really look right. They should usually be light green and kind of more flat. And here is sort of brown and puffy. This is an aphid that has been parasitized, and we actually can refer to these sometimes as mummies, sort of just empty shells. Here is an exit hole in another egg from a parasitized insect. It could be an aphid, it's hard to tell from this in that corner. But also you can see another aphid here that's got a wasp coming out from it. as it's been parasitized. Here you can see a healthy aphid at the top, and you can see the parasitized aphid just looks bloated. And if you see these in your garden, you don't have to worry that it's some other kind of pest. You can actually be glad that it means that you have the beneficial insect helping to control that population of aphids. And they can actually parasitize a lot of them at once. So these are all parasitized aphids. You can see where the wasp has sort of cut a hole in the shell and escaped. So this is not a new kind of bug. This is actually parasitized aphid mummies. And so they are evidence that you've got some good beneficial activity going on. You may have seen a parasitized hornworm in the past in your garden if you've grown tomatoes. I've also seen these on peppers sometimes. And so in this case, these are all eggs of a parasitic wasp, and they will eventually devour this hornworm and then leave their little egg case through that opening, and there's the little parasitic wasp on to do its living and its reproducing and getting rid of other tomato hornworms. Now, as they get parasitized, they obviously stop eating, so they'll stop taking care of your plants. They'll stop eating up your tomato plants. But so if you see one that's got the parasitized egg cases on, I would leave that hornworm. You know, usually if you see a hornworm in your tomato patch, you pluck it right away. But if you see it with the egg cases, then you definitely want to go ahead and keep that one. Let those wasps emerge and carry on to the next generation. So when we think about managing the insect pests, we can think about it in an integrated manner. And at the end of the slide deck, I should also mention that Paul Prill, who's on here today, has also helped with editing this presentation. And thinking about integrating pest management, you can start reducing the amount of pest pressure you have in your yard, in your garden, whether it's flowers or your vegetable garden, by having the right plant in the right place, because stressed plants are always more susceptible to pest problems. They're more susceptible to fungus and infection problems as well as pest problems. Once you do see a problem with a plant, you want to make sure, what host plant do you have? What are the symptoms? What are the possible pests? And then what are their natural enemies? So we've already talked about several kinds of beneficial insects, those wasps, the ladybugs, and so forth, that are the natural enemies for some of these common pests. So if we can encourage them, that would be the best way to go about reducing the pests that you have. It's not going to be quick fix. Quick fixes may be satisfying in the short run, but in the long run, they're not the best strategy. You want to have a decision-making threshold. How bad is the pest infestation? What can I do to get rid of them? Maybe naturally, maybe just getting rid of aphids by hitting it with direct spray of water from the hose. Aphids have piercing mouth parts and suck the fluid from your plants. And if you hit them with water from the hose, they'll just get knocked off and die. And that's a good way to intervene on some aphid infestation. Can you physically remove the pests? Like I talked about, actually seeing the tomato hornworm and plucking them off when you see them on your tomatoes. That's a good way to get rid of. If you see one, take a look for others. If you see their droppings, the caterpillar droppings, you know to look for the caterpillar. you can, earlier in the season, look for the eggs, and you can get rid of them perhaps that way. I mentioned at the very beginning that one of the ways I get rid of my squash bugs is by just going out in the morning and looking at the underside of the leaves for my squash plants and just squashing with my thumb the eggs of the squash bugs, and that can help reduce the amount of pest pressure and save me from using some sort of other pesticide. You can, if there are not too many, a suggestion here to use a Q-tip that you've dipped in rubbing alcohol, or perhaps use a close spray with some insecticidal soap, something that's not too broadly spread around, but that's going to directly hit the particular pest that you're worried about. And I think I need to plug in my computer. Hold on one second. If you have a major problem, you can, maybe in a dormant season, use horticultural oil or some other organic pesticide. That would be more of a last resort. That's not what you want to do first. You want to try to put the right plant, a healthy plant, in the right place, and keep the pests from being too much. If you go and use a chemical pesticide, there are a lot of different kinds out there, but really try to avoid the neonicotinoid pesticides. These are structurally related to nicotine from cigarettes, that same kind of chemical structure, and they have been found to be very problematic for honeybees in particular, but also other native beneficial insects that we really want to keep around. So how do we make sure our beneficial insects have what they need so they can survive? You need to make sure they have food, water, and shelter, just like all organisms, right? And the thing that they enjoy eating is going to be constantly changing. So if they're getting rid of all the aphids in your yard, they're going to move on to some other pest to get rid of. So that's a good thing. A lot of these beneficials will attack your pest problem insects when they're younger, and then adults, they'll eat pollen and nectar for their food source. So you want to make sure you have the right kinds of food sources for those adults so they can have their nymphs, the young insects, eating your pests. And because these beneficials are often very tiny and they have small mouth parts, if you provide a lot of tiny flowers that have nectar close to the surface, those are going to be the better for feeding those beneficials. And you want to make sure you have a variety of food sources for them across the season because we know that different flowers are going to bloom at different times. And then the last point here about don't clean up the garden until mid to late March. So maybe just begin starting to clean up your garden now is better because they often will overwinter in the debris that's in the garden, in the leaf litter, in the plant litter. I don't suggest leaving tomato litter. Throw the tomatoes out early. But cleaning up the garden in your flower garden and so forth, leaving the leaves is better for allowing those beneficial insects to make it through the winter, and so they're ready for you to do the job for you in the spring. And then the last thing we say here is diversity is stability. You want to have a variety of beneficial insects to take care of the variety of pests you may have. And you want to have a variety of food sources for those beneficial insects so that they can have a lot of different options and a robust environment to continue to grow. So what are some of the best nectar plants for food for some of these beneficial. So here we have one of our little hoverfly, or could be a parasitic wasp here, enjoying a small flower. Remember, they like the blossoms that are pretty open. Things from the aster family, carrot, buckwheat, those are really good families because those flowers tend to be fairly small or very open. And especially early in the season, so early here coming into April, when there's not a whole lot of pest insects out there as food, they're going to need that pollen and nectar. So a really good plant in a lot of ways is buckwheat. And these have shallow flowers, white flowers that attract beneficial insects. And a lot of folks will plant buckwheat kind of, especially in a vegetable garden, to bring in and feed these beneficials so that they can take care of their pest problems, particularly aphids and mites. Buckwheat can also serve as a good ground cover. Remember, in other talks, we talk about not leaving any soil just bare. So if you put buckwheat down as a ground cover, it will be a good place to keep weeds from growing as well. Since it blooms pretty quickly, about 3 weeks after it germinates, it needs to be in the warm season. It's not going to grow quite yet, but it's a good nectar source also for honeybees. And just as a plug for this, it's really got a really sweet little leaf. It's a little heart-shaped leaf and really pretty little flowers. You can just have a patch of this and then just at the end of the season, let it lay down, and it can be a nice mulch as well in place in the garden where it was growing. So it grows pretty quickly, pretty easily, and suppresses weeds. And it also will, like many roots, produce a micro rhizome area that will release nutrients into the soil. So the acids that are produced by the roots will help future plants actually access some of the nutrients that are already in the soil. We, at least I, have a Tennessee lawn, which is basically a lawn of weeds. So it's a great lawn for feeding beneficials. Actually, many people, well, this is red clover, but there's another clover called crimson clover that's a great ground cover as well. But all of these have nice, tiny little flowers, provide good sources of food for their beneficials early in the season, especially. So these are going to be nice to leave. Wait until mid-April or May to mow your lawn if you have a Tennessee lawn like me, and let those be food sources for your beneficials. There are a number of different annuals that are good for our beneficials. This one, the sweet alyssum, is pretty hardy, and you can sow it early in the spring. It doesn't take too long to germinate, 15 to 20 days. It probably likes soil. I haven't checked the soil temperature around my house quite yet, but it's probably not quite warm enough. Might be getting warm enough after another couple days like today. But this is a great plant because it looks really pretty. Nice mounding white flowers, and it's pretty drought tolerant and heat resistant, so it can make it through some of our later summers. And so here you can see you can plant it in a lot of different places. Here it is in the vegetable garden, in between rows of vegetables. Here it is on a sort of driving track, sort of as the center lane. And you can just tuck it in a lot of different spots in the garden, and it can provide food for those beneficial parasitic wasps. And tuck it into the landscape and amongst your rocks, other plantings. I don't know why this is popping up, sorry. And it really nice in as a mass of plants. Another flower that does well as a beneficial feeder is this annual wildflower of the cornflower, or the bachelor's button. And this flower dries very nicely too. So if you like to make arrangements, it's a good flower. It has extra floral nectaries, so it's going to release nectar even when it's not in flower. So that's going to bring in pollinating insects. We've been talking about beneficial insects in the context of getting rid of other pest insects, but we have beneficials that also do pollination for us. So it will bring in other insects as well for that purpose. So here it is, tucked into different places in the landscape, in amongst some other plants in the landscape. Here is a single specimen, and here it is tucked in with a variety of other kind of wildflower area. Cosmos is a really versatile plant. It has a number of different colors you can get, and it will bloom from June until it frosts. And this will bring in a lot of good pollinating insects, as well as our hover flies, lacewings, and some of the other insects that I've been talking about. And here's a big patch of cosmos, and that was in Donaldson a few years ago. Nice and happy, bright color, very cheerful. And again, you can tuck it into different places in the landscape. So you can tuck it into the garden, tuck it into different places, and it will be there as a pretty plant for you, as well as providing for your beneficial insects. In addition to annuals, we have a lot of good perennials that are important for helping our beneficials. Coreopsis is a nice, easy to care for, blooms a long time and survives our dry times. There are a lot of different color varieties, mainly yellow, but also some other colors, and it's going to bring in a lot of the beneficials. So you can start to see the theme here with these, excuse me, open, flat type flowers with short access to the nectar and pollen. If you like hummingbirds, you want those tubular flowers, that's a different talk. This one we're focusing on beneficials. And here's some Coreopsis mixed into the landscape. Catmint is another very pretty flower that goes into a lot of places. It's going to attract pollinators, butterflies and bees, as well as our beneficials. They can grow a little bit taller, 3 feet tall, and again, very drought tolerant. So these are useful in our area, especially in July and August. Goldenrod, now this goldenrod, people are going to say, wait, this is going to give me allergies. This is not the allergy causing plant. That is a different plant. This is goldenrod. It blooms from late summer into fall, and it provides a later source of nectar for butterflies and bees. We get a lot of good beneficials. Praying mantis likes it, wasps and spiders and soldier beetles, and so they are very happy when there's goldenrod. Sunflowers are a popular plant in general, but they bloom in the later season, August through September, again providing food for the beneficial insects. And there's some sunflowers in the garden. Now, Rachel mentioned that I like to grow herbs, and usually when you're growing herbs for your kitchen, you want them before they flower, but I encourage folks to grow herbs and let them go to flower, because these are ideal kinds of plants for feeding the beneficial insects. In fact, cilantro, if you let it grow to flower and seed, you get a whole different herb. You get coriander. But from most of these, you can let them continue on at maybe some of them go on to flower, so you can feed the beneficials. Dill is a very useful particular herb because it supports the beneficial insects with those flower types that we've been talking about, but it also happens to be the plant that the swallowtail, one of the swallowtail varieties, has its caterpillars laid on. So that would be a great plant to grow, some for yourself and extra for the butterflies. So you can grow an insect garden or an insectary garden where you can have a whole variety of flowers and a variety of insects. And you can see there's not just a benefit to, bringing in the beneficials, but it really is a very pretty garden. So you can provide for the beneficial bugs and you get some free pest control. We didn't really talk about pests of the squirrel and deer and rabbit type, but that's a whole different discussion. So here's a good resource. I'd like to highlight this extension tennessee.edu publications. There are lots of good publications in there, and this is a really good source for information that's been collected through research. And I'll leave this up for a second. And Rachel, are there any questions? Hopefully a bunch.
Let's see, the last question, can you hear me?
Yep.
The last question I saw was the question about the wood bees, and I can't recall if you had answered that because I was trying to write down who was signing on, but it was, I have wood bees, how do I control them without harming the good bees?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've addressed that yet.
So the wood bees, I think you probably mean the carpenter bees, and they look like a bumblebee. You can tell them apart because the bumblebees will have a hairy abdomen and the carpenter bees will have a smooth abdomen. Now, the carpenter bees are a native bee. They are beneficial to us as well. They just happen to choose to bore into wood to lay their eggs. So that's when they become a problem. They're separately a problem because we want to have wooden furniture or wooden decks or something. So the things that I've seen to help with protecting the wood is it's a copper-based paint, or it's a spray you can put on there. I wouldn't try to spray the bees themselves. Maybe just treat the wood so they will choose a different location for laying their eggs, because there's not really any way to sort of stop them without potentially hurting some of the others as well, if you were going to use a spray, for example. I'm not sure. I guess let me see if I can open the chat so I can see the questions too.
Yeah, that was the only question in the Q&A section, and then in the chat section, Carolyn has shared a recipe for insect spray.
Okay, so Carolyn Turner, yeah, so for her aphids on her milkweed, water, cooking oil, dish soap, put in a sprayer, shake thoroughly, stem and leaves, don't put it on the fruit. I've used a Castile soap as a spray, but any of these soaps, even organic things, will affect the beneficials as well. So if you can be, again, go back to that idea of observing what is the problem. Is it a big enough problem that I need to treat it? And then decide what to treat it with. So if you have a mass of aphids and you just see aphids, you don't see that they've been parasitized, you don't see that there are ladybug nymphs or ladybugs, then maybe go ahead and treat. If you see that you have some of the beneficials at work, maybe a thumb will be enough. And again, it's going to depend on how many plants you have. If you have an acre of milkweed, it may be different than if you have 15 plants or one plant. Let's see, what other questions?
Okay. Can you see those, Carol? So we've got one from Nancy and a comment from Susan. Yeah, there are people popping up. So let me know.
The question about the Asian ladybugs, are they good too? That's an interesting question, because usually the problem with them is that they're indoors, and that's not where you want them. They're not beneficial to you in your house in the winter. They will, if they're in your house, they're probably also overwintering in the leaf litter outside. So I would go ahead and get rid of the ones in my house. But I'm not sure. Generally, imported insects are not as helpful because they don't have the natural predator-prey relationship in the cycle where they have moved in. I don't know enough about the Asian ladybug specifically. I would imagine that they still would be eating aphids and doing that kind of thing. They're not that different as far as that goes, but whether they are causing other problems, I don't know. Let's see. What are the other questions? Whether Dawn has petroleum in it. The one about the dish soap, I would use Pest, which is a straight soap. Let's see. Any other questions? It's scrolling kind of quickly here. I'm trying to.
There's leaf, it says leaf miner on boxwoods. What is the best way to treat? Is there a beneficial insect that I can encourage through other plants?
So for leaf miners, I think they're a little bit more tricky because they're protected from these predator insects because they're inside the leaf. My strategy would be, like, as an organic strategy, to just pick off the leaves that I could see that they were in, and how to protect in terms of beneficial insects for them. I'm not sure. I'll have to investigate whether there were any that would be specifically helpful for that. Maybe some of the parasitic wasps would be able to identify that and lay their eggs in there, but I'm not familiar with whether they do that.
Here's an interesting post. It says, from Carol, I hung a brown bag full of crumpled paper under the bench that the carpenter bees were eating. It looks like a hornet's nest and it works. No problem now for 2 years.
Oh, good.
I think everybody can see that chat, but just in case, I wanted to read that. That's pretty
Yes, thank you, because I'm having trouble scrolling through the chat.
Leaf-footed bugs are my bane of tomatoes. Any suggestions for controlling them?
The best thing with the leaf-footed bugs, or the big leg bugs, sometimes they're related to, I would be on the lookout for their eggs, and then I would squash them as often as I could see them. They are pretty crafty. They do hide fast, and if you come into the garden, they tend to run. As far as a beneficial insect to take care of them, any of these beneficials that we've been talking about would be good. A lot of times people will say, well, okay, I'm going to buy ladybugs and release them in my garden, or I'm going to buy praying mantis cocoon and put it in my garden to introduce these beneficials to try to get rid of certain specific problems. But you can do that, but be aware that most of those are going to go elsewhere. They're going to travel to other people's. I mean, that's a nice thing to do for your neighborhood, because they also have ranges and areas. And so you can try some of that. If you haven't got a good beneficial ecosystem sort of going already, you can try some of that with an investment. But I think if you put in the food sources for the beneficials, then it's kind of like, if you build it, they will come. If you grow it, they will come. They'll find the food. So if you do it now and through the whole season, you'll build up a richer, diverse community of beneficials that will help suppress some of those problems. Now, the other thing you can do, just as a general practice, as far as like tomatoes particularly, is grow them in different places each year, because not only you want to grow them in different places because of the viruses that can be in the soil, but you can also get them perhaps away from where the pest has overwintered as well. So if you move them to another place, it'll take the leaf footed bugs a little longer to get there, and you'll be able to let your plants get stronger before they get sort of overwhelmed. So that's another potential strategy.
Here's my question for that. So when you said just get the eggs, are leaf-footed bugs eggs identifiable? Like, how do you know? I guess, can you look them up in a guide to see what they look like? Or
yeah, so a lot of those pests, like the squash bugs and the stink bugs, they tend to lay their eggs in a kind of like clusters. So if you look at the backs of the leaves, you can see the eggs in the clusters. The big leg bugs and the leaf-footed bugs, I'm not sure if they're cluster type eggs, but you can look those up as well. And become a citizen scientist. If you're not sure what kind of egg you have, stick it in a jar and let it hatch, because you don't want to get rid of the egg of a good guy, right? So
okay. That's all the questions that I've seen. I hope I've read everyone's. And Carol, because I started recording this, I told her before we got on, I was like, I cannot forget to record, and I had my sticker up, and you were well into your first slide before I remembered to hit record. So we missed your introduction. So I do want to say on this recording that Carol Taylor is the president of the Master Gardeners of Davidson County. So thank you for sharing your knowledge tonight. It's been very helpful. I'm sure everyone's appreciated that. And
I've got a lot of good questions to go look up the answers to now. So look back. We do presentations a lot of times at the libraries around town. So we may have some amendments, additions, so you can check on there.
Yeah, and some people are starting to, so somebody sent in their email on this, but again, also on the WPNC@nashville.gov. If you email, and just say when you email, hey, I was on the call last night for the beneficial insects, and want to be included when we post the YouTube video, which often takes us a couple of weeks to get out there. And so at that point, then we will let everyone know that it's out and about for you. But Carol, thank you so much. And for everyone who's been signing on to these webinars, our next webinar is called Amphibians and Reptiles of Tennessee. That's going to be by Pandy Upchurch. So that's going to be on April the 13th. That's the next one we have coming up. But Carol, thank you so much for your time tonight. I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad you rallied and got on tonight. And
Rachel, if
so
you
thank
want,
you so much.
I'm sorry, I can send you a PDF of
Go
the
ahead.
slides if you wanted to have that to send out to people.
That sounds great.
Okay.
That sounds great. All right, well, you are getting a lot of thank yous, and it is 6:54. So without any other questions, once again, thanks everyone for signing on tonight. And thank you, Carol Taylor, so much for sharing all your knowledge and information with us. It's been very interesting. And I hope you all have a good night. And I'm going to turn off the recording and bid everyone well. Thank you again, Carol.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.